Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. Today is the day that may be decisive in the presidential race, or maybe we just hope it's going to be decisive because we want this to be over, because we want a little bit of clarity. We have some new polls from Pennsylvania, which are bringing things into a little bit of focus. The death toll worldwide on the coronavirus has passed 1 million. But the big story today is, of course, the first presidential debate, Donald Trump facing off against Joe Biden. Joining us to talk about that is Jonathan Allen, best-selling author and NBC correspondent. You actually have a fancy title at NBC, don't you?
I'm senior political analyst.
Okay. Is there a junior political analyst?
There is not. I'm the senior,
Okay.
the junior, the left political analyst, the right political analyst, the center political analyst, the defensive tackle political analyst.
There you go. I mean, when you're a senior editor or a senior political analyst, that just gives you the right basically to tell kids to get off your lawn, right?
Yeah, I mean it's part of a negotiation, where you don't get extra money for the extra thing, so you're like, can you put senior in front of it? I think that's the way that something along those lines.
Okay,
No, I was a senior reporter. And then I became an analyst for this year, basically because I'm writing a book, and there was an interest in, trying to prevent conflicts between information gathered for the book. And
so, what's the book going to be?
It'll be about the 2020 election.
Oh, brother! So you're not done yet?
No, definitely not. No.
So here we are. We're sitting here on it's September 29th.
I mean, Charlie, listen, you got to imagine the difficulty of trying to write about this election when the people close in with one candidate are not actually with that candidate, and the people close into the other candidate either keep leaving the White House or ending up in, tremendous legal jeopardy from which they are usually only reachable through lawyers.
Well, it's certainly possible that some of those people will have a lot of time on their hands to talk to you, right? They'll have a lot of free time to be able to. So here we are at the end of September 2020. At the beginning of the month, the 538 average had Joe Biden up by 7 points. It has been an absolutely insane month, as usual. And at the end of the month, Joe Biden is leading by 7 points. Nothing has moved. Nothing has changed. So I guess the question is, does this debate tonight, which is going to be watched by tens of millions of people, will it make a difference? Or is this race just too stable? What is your take?
It's so easy to take the position that the debate's not going to matter because there's a pretty big range of the spectrum in which the numbers don't move that much or look like they haven't moved that much. However, I think one of the reasons the race has been stable is that we haven't had any debates yet. I think people want to see Trump and Biden up against each other. I think they want to see what Biden's answers are to Trump's charges and vice versa. It doesn't take a lot in an election that appears to be very close. It doesn't take a lot to sort of change the formula of that. So even small movements can matter. I look back at, say, Mitt Romney in 2012 in the first debate with Barack Obama. He came in trailing significantly. I think the average was about 3.5, 4 points, but the sort of broader context was Romney had been trailing by a lot coming into that debate. And by the end of it, he actually pulled ahead of Obama. When I say the end of it, I mean, within the next week. And then there was that Biden-Palin debate that I think helped stabilize Obama. And then the second two presidential debates, Obama did better than he had. But, Romney had a real opportunity after that first debate to put the hammer down on Obama and was unable to do it. Ronald Reagan, 1981 debate against Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
They come into that debate. Carter's got a lead. There's a rally around the flag effect with the Iran hostage situation. And then, after that debate, Reagan took off, really in the final week of the campaign.
Was it the debate or was it just the other fundamentals? I guess one of the questions I always have about this, like, for example, 2012 was a pretty good example, but that was always Obama's. I mean, Obama seemed to have a relatively, even though the polls went back and forth, the fundamentals favored him. There was a blip from the debate, but that debate blip was not enough to change the underlying dynamics of the campaign. Or do you have a different read on that?
I have a slightly different read on it, which is that the debates give an opportunity for the candidates to try to frame what it is the public is voting on. And it's not just the people who watch the debates; it's the people who read about them in the newspaper or see clips of them on television, or now streaming, or through their viral social media feeds. I mean, I think the after effects of a debate can really sometimes be a little latent, and I think that they matter a lot for framing what it is voters are making their decision on. Because the average person is, they walk into the debate, the person who's persuadable, whether that means persuading them to vote from not voting or persuading from, one side to the other, they're not people who are paying like super close attention to begin with. And I think the debates help them form a decision about like what it is they want to focus on this election. I talked to Kathleen Hall Jameson at the Annenberg Public Policy Center in Philadelphia this week, and I mean, she was talking about the evidence that she has for debates moving public opinion over time that is somewhat counter to a lot of the narrative we get that they don't make.
Okay, so you raise an interesting point though about the persuadable voters who may not have been paying attention. Isn't that exactly the kind of voter that's likely to be watching HDTV tonight rather than watching the debates? If you haven't made up your mind now, if you haven't been paying much attention now, why would you tune in tonight?
Because it's that first opportunity to see them against each other. It's a main event. It's the Super Bowl of politics, if you will. Is the first presidential debate in any cycle. What did we get? Like 84 million people tuning in last time to the first Clinton Trump debate. I mean, I don't know what the ratings are going to be, but I do believe that the vast majority of uh, I shouldn't say vast majority, but I believe the majority of people who are going to vote will actually tune into the debate.
So you have a piece up on NBC about the soft bigotry of Trump's low expectations, and there's been a lot of talk about this. They seem to have realized very belatedly that by lowering the expectations for Joe Biden, they were handing him a gift because they'd spent maybe hundreds of millions of dollars convincing people that Joe Biden is so senile that he's barely going to be able to stumble up to the podium. So, but at least in the last 48 hours, it looks like they're saying, no, let's tell everybody that Joe Biden actually is a pretty good debater. But really, so how does the expectations game shake out for you?
I mean, at this point, Joe Biden merely needs to walk up on stage and speak English in complete sentences to beat the caricature that Donald Trump has drawn for him. I don't know that that's the standard that that most voters are going to have for him, but certainly to beat the Trump expectations, it should not be that hard. And of course, if he fails to do it, which I assume Trump will accuse him of failing to do it, whether he does or not, um, is potentially very risky for Biden. He is not uh, the same guy that he was when he was 45 years old. Other than wanting to talk a lot. I mean, he's somebody you couldn't get away from in the Senate halls if you spoke to him. You have like a 45-minute conversation every time. But I'm not sure that him losing a little bit of his fastball in terms of like debate speed is an indication of any sort of diminished mental acuity other than the performance art of a debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain amount of baked inness of the gap. So I actually do think that this is going to have a pretty big audience. I don't know that it's going to, people are telling pollsters, three-quarters of voters, 75% are telling pollsters they're going to watch. I doubt it's going to be that much, but it will be a huge audience, as you point out. And this really is kind of an extraordinary moment in political theater because we all feel we're kind of oversaturated with Donald Trump. We've seen everything. It's been a constant presence for 4 years, but we really haven't seen him in a setting like we're going to see tonight, right? I mean, the guy hasn't prepared for this, as far as I know. So we kind of know what to expect, right? It's kind of going to be a little bit of the rally, a little bit of the briefing, a little bit of the Twitter rants and all of that. But for the last 3.5 years, this is a guy that's controlled his own environment. I mean, he's created this sort of bubble of affirmation around him. I mean, he's controlled the White House. His rallies are controlled. Even the press briefings are reasonably controlled because he can always walk out. He's had a couple of tough interviews, but now he's not only going to face some tough questions. He's going to face an actual opponent. And so that really is something that Donald Trump hasn't experienced. Actually, the first debates tend to be shaky for incumbent presidents because this really is kind of a culture shock for them after being the president of the United States for 4 years. I'm thinking you mentioned Obama's first debate was shaky. George W. Bush's first debate in 2004 was also notoriously shaky. But this is very much I mean, he mixed it up 4 years ago, but he really hasn't had to for the last 4 years.
No, he hasn't, and he comes in. I'm not sure the degree to which he appreciates this, but he comes in such a different position. In 2016, he walks in to the debate and he's trying to take down the establishment and he's trying to rattle the system. And there is value to him in being somewhat disrespectful or irreverent when it comes to the trappings of the debate and how you're supposed to behave on stage, because he was modeling himself that way as president of the United States. Even though he's trying to run as sort of an outsider insider, I'm not sure that flies the same way. The wandering around the stage to uh, to loom over your opponent. Some of the other antics we saw on stage from him, I think that played well for him and pushed into his message in 2016. In 2020, I think he still needs at some level to prove that he's presidential. And that is an incredible irony, given that he's the president and Biden, who is not the president. No one has raised the question of whether he's qualified to be president. Nobody's raised the question of whether he looks like a president or has that presidential timbre. The only question Donald Trump has raised is whether he needs drugs to be mentally competent to debate. And so we're now at the point where the Biden campaign has basically told Trump that if he wants to piss in a cup to express himself, he can do that. And the Trump campaign, in a last-minute rally to try to raise expectations, is called Biden a master debater, which
it's hilarious.
I mean, this is it's unbelievable where we are.
So, John, I have to tell you, when I first saw this, I saw it on Twitter, the quote from the Biden campaign about peeing in a cup. And I swear I thought it was a spoof. I really didn't think that they would actually put out that statement. I mean, that's one of the classics of American political history, that we're actually having two presidential candidates the night before the first presidential debate, talking about whether or not we're going to pee in a cup and who's pissed away what, etc. But this is the moment that we are in, isn't it?
It's astounding, Charlie.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm no prude.
No.
So it's not like I haven't heard these terms before. But it is a different reaction from the Biden campaign, and
Yeah.
a fun one, I guess, compared to the old Fritz Hollings response to whether he should take a drug test before one of his debates. He returned and said that his opponent could take an IQ test, he would take a drug test.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So, okay, you help me with this because I think I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but it's one of those names that I read but I don't actually say. Philippe Reines.
It's pronounced more like sinus, Rhinus.
Okay, Philippe Reines. See, I knew I was going to get it wrong. That's why I asked. He had a really interesting piece, a former Clinton aide. He had a very interesting piece in the Post yesterday about the debate, saying Donald Trump is a very bad debater. Donald Trump is very difficult to debate. These two seemingly contradictory statements are equally true. He's a dangerous opponent. In 2016, it was because he had nothing to lose. Now it's because he has everything to lose. And I think that this is interesting because, and I wrote this in my newsletter this morning. I said, look, no matter how well prepared Biden is, I mean, debating Trump's kind of like trying to conjugate Latin verbs in the middle of a hurricane of bullshit. I mean, he's going to throw the insults, the smears, the lies, and just shameless fabrications at him, and that's going to be that's kind of Joe Biden's big test, right? Not to get rattled or sidetracked by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the hurricane of bullshit comes in. In Latin, I'm trying to remember like agricola is like a farm.
Yeah.
No, look. Philippe obviously has spent a lot of time studying the president. I'm not sure about the causality of he had nothing to lose before last time. Before the last set of debates and everything to lose now. I think Donald Trump is just Donald Trump. I think he's constantly looking for ways to uh, tear into his opponents, whether they are political opponents, members of his cabinet, close friends who
Well,
have
well,
said that he shouldn't be president, and he's bombastic about it, and it's just who he is.
but this goes back to your point earlier about that it's different because he's the president now. And so you wonder, how does it play? He's going to come out. His instincts will tell him that he's going to lash out. He's going to attack. And I kind of wonder, if the audience is as big as we think it is, there are going to be tens of millions of people that, haven't necessarily become inured to the, kind of, White House briefings or rally, meltdowns. And when he lashes out, I kind of wonder how it's going to play for a lot of them. It may be kind of unsettling, the kind of the ugliness. So I mean, there's a risk for Trump, but I'm guessing that there's no one around him that's basically saying, "Hey, just make sure you're not too hard on Hunter Biden." I mean, those are not the words being whispered in his ear right now.
Yeah, even if they did, he wouldn't listen to it.
Right, right.
I think the great risk for Trump is that he manages to make himself unpresidential. That he takes that that bar that he's cleared, he takes it and he puts it back over his head again. For a lot of those voters that you're talking about, that are not they're loosely attached to politics, or even less than loosely attached to politics. A lot of Americans aren't steeped in this stuff every day, and they just want to know whether they can look forward to a little bit more money in their pocket next year, if they're going to be able to send their kids to school next year. And I think ranting and raving, about the system that you're trying to destroy, that has been, put in the path of the American people, is I.
No,
I mean,
you're
he's
right.
the president of the United States, and
Yeah,
all of a
well,
sudden, my expectation is that we're going to see him somewhat acting like somebody who is not president of the United States, if past his prologue.
and speaking in that sort of Fox News code speak, where if you haven't been following a lot of this stuff, you'll have no idea what he's talking about. So here's the problem for Biden. And I said before, I think there's a certain amount of the gaffe thing built into it, but they're going to be judged by completely different standards. I mean, Biden will be judged as a kind of reasonably normal politician. Trump is Trump, and that's kind of the problem. Also, I'm sure you've given thought to all of this because you work in the digital world, that there's the debate, and it's always been true. Then there's the post-debate spin, that sometimes the debates are won the day after the debate. And in this particular debate, this 90-minute debate will be broken up into a gazillion 30-second internet memes, right? That both sides are going to claim that they won. I mean, no matter what happens tonight, that the Trump fluffers are going to be out there saying, on Facebook, that Trump destroyed Biden, and it's going to be out there. So this is like an act. This is like, 3 or 4 or 5 acts, right? In terms of how this actually plays out, in which the actual real-time debate may not actually be the most important thing.
I mean, Charlie, again, if past his
Or do you
prologue,
disagree?
no, but again, if past his prologue, what we're going to see is foreign agents pumping out Facebook ads with Biden stumbling in moments that he didn't actually stumble. That there will be
Yes.
like doctored video, and that the president will retweet that. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not even
No.
a question of like what the response is going to be from Trump. It's going to be, they would love to have real video, but if they don't have video, they'll make it up. And
Well, see, this is but they've been doing this too, and that's the universality of those videos out there, even being pushed by anti Trump types, making it look like Joe Biden can't put together a sentence, which means that when he does put together a sentence, Pa's going to look at Ma and go, well, he doesn't seem that crazy. Okay, let's just move on because
and also
just go ahead.
when he basically espouses values that are, to the great consternation of the left. But when you're an out of power party, there tends to be a lot of sitting on your concerns. To the great consternation of the left, when Joe Biden expresses himself, he is expressing values that fall pretty much within the mainstream of what you would call like center left to center right
Yeah.
politics. I mean, you know, Ma and Pa watching this are not going to think to themselves, God, Joe Biden sounds like, you know, uh, sounds like Eugene Debs. You know,
Well,
they're
that
not going to think to themselves, Joe Biden sounds like like Hugo Chavez or you know, or Castro. I mean, you know,
well that no, and that's the other big upside, because they've invested huge amounts of money in saying, well, Joe, you know, what was the the line from the AEI scholar that I know how awful Donald Trump is, but the extreme left is going to force me to vote for him again. Well, if you've been telling people that this guy is basically just a puppet of Antifa and that he's a radical revolutionary Marxist, he's going to stand up there and go, you know, guys, really, come on. I mean, I'm not that guy.
Joe
So,
Biden is the Democratic senator that, to the extent they knew it, Republicans liked when he was in the Senate. We're like, oh, that guy kind of makes sense.
okay, so let's talk about the New York Times story about the taxes. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and they came out with this just extraordinary amount of detail about Donald Trump's taxes. By now, I think everybody, at least people who've listened to this podcast, know what is in it. The fact that he only paid $750 in taxes in 2016, 2017, hadn't paid taxes at all in 10 of the previous 15 years. And the reason he didn't pay taxes is not because he was so smart and clever or used depreciation, but because he was hemorrhaging so much cash. And the story today, I mean, it's a hell of a lead on the story today, where he's bragging, I used my brain, I used my negotiating skills, I worked it all out, he told viewers. Now my company is bigger than ever, and it was stronger than it ever was. And the Times says it was all a hoax, because his core businesses were shedding money. So I know it's tedious, Jonathan, to ask the question, does this make a difference? But it is interesting the way people are pounding away on that $750 number and saying, well, I paid more than $750. I did this. You know, when I was working at Starbucks, I did this. That the average taxpayer pretty much knows how much they paid in taxes. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how hard Joe Biden hits him on this tonight.
I mean, most taxpayers pay many multiples,
Many.
you know, 10, you know, at least a multiple of 10 of that, you know, and so uh, they're going to be listening to that. And look, the box that Trump is in is he can choose to say that he lied to the IRS, or he can choose to say that he lied to the public about what a brilliant businessman he was. And saying that he lied to the IRS is not a legal problem, because you can just go out and say it whether or not it's true, but he's not going to do that. He's not going to say he was lying about being a businessman. He's going to say this is fake news, and yet there's evidence of it that's incontrovertible. It's so difficult to contradict the evidence of it that the House Ways and Means Chairman, Ranking Member Kevin Brady, is trying to open an investigation, despite not having a gavel, is trying to open an investigation into who leaked it. You don't do a witch hunt on who leaked something if it's not true. But I would argue that the bigger effect of this is Trump's ratings on honesty and trustworthiness are very low. And when you do something that appears to be deceptive, that makes your ratings on that usually go down. It is impossible for people to believe, and I say people, I mean outside of his base, to believe what he's saying, which means when he makes an argument for himself on a debate stage, it has less value than it would if
Well,
people believed what he's saying. And I'm sorry, Charlie, one more
yeah.
thing I want to connect this to. His own taxes, like that affects us all in that, maybe he found a way to make it so that that he didn't have to pull his weight, right? And you can say, okay, well, maybe he's smart and he used the tax code the right way, and he didn't technically cheat or do anything illegal. But the problem is with the deception, the problem with the duplicity is we've seen it from him in the presidency in places where it does matter. When he goes out and tells the public that the pandemic is not that bad, even though he knows that it's so how fatal this disease is, people make decisions on their own safety based on what the president is saying. And we have seen like the young woman at the Democratic convention who said her father listened to Trump and went out and got coronavirus and died. Some of those deaths, according to this woman, are attributable to Donald Trump lying to the public about the severity of the disease. And I don't know if Joe Biden's going to make that connection or not, but from my perspective, there is a difference between lying to the people about something that doesn't really affect them and lying to the people about something that does, to the tune of 200,000 dead people, many more sickened, and millions of jobs lost, and the federal government having to spend trillions of dollars in debt financed appropriations in order to try to recover from the economic calamity.
I also think there's another threat to Trump here, which is the threat to his populist. He's claimed to be a populist, and he was able to pull that off. Even though I'm the billionaire, I'm going to speak for the forgotten American. But when you start reading the dazzling details about the $70,000 haircuts and the fake deals with Ivanka, and the fact that billionaires can pay only $750 in taxes, it really, I think, if Biden handles it well, it undercuts Trump with those voters that had been the core for him back in 2016, because it is hard to sit back and go, okay, there's something deeply wrong with America. I mean, you step back and you go, there's something deeply wrong with America, with a system in which somebody could be this rich and pay so much less than I pay. And so in terms of that class warfare, in terms of inequality and the elitist versus populist, this, I think, gives Biden an opening that he was already exploiting, but also it's a vulnerability, because let's face it, that populist claim by Donald Trump was always fake. It was always fake. This has been a president who ran as a populist but governed as a plutocrat, and this puts this front and center again.
Yeah, and it's such an easy argument to make, which is, I can lower your taxes if people like Donald Trump pay theirs.
Ooh. That's good.
Like, it's just, I mean, it's like, this is not a difficult concept. Just even within the realm of it. And by the way, I don't think the taxes in and of themselves like hurt Trump badly with his base. I think the base is so attached to him, the sort of cult of Trump.
Hardcore base.
I mean, you hear the arguments that come back and they say, well, was it illegal? Can you prove it was illegal?
Right.
And if you say, well, this looks like it might have been illegal, with paying consulting fees to someone who's actually a member of the board of directors of the company, or something along those lines, where you say, like, look, this is not something where the IRS would look favorably upon it, whether or not it's technically legal. The next thing is, well, is it wrong? Or should we have taxes? And the responses are, distracting from that. Where I think it matters, though, is with the people who voted for Trump because they couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton, or voted for Trump because they believed he would be better for the economy or for their own personal economy, and have not found that to be true over the course of the last 4 years. Not the people that loved him, but the people that were willing to accept him.
And there was a huge portion of his base, and I can't stress this strongly enough, who really did buy the aura that he was a successful, competent businessman, that they were very, very attracted by that. And they believed all of that. And because I remember sort of fighting against saying, well, what about Trump University and Trump Steaks and Trump's Airline and all these other failed companies? And somehow that didn't register. And it probably won't register again, But as we started off talking about that fight for the 2 or 3%, if there's the perception that it's not just the taxes, it's also the lying and also the failure and the hemorrhaging, the fact that he's just not that good a businessman, and that he is an elitist who's been gaming the country. So I guess that's the theme that's running through a couple of these. But I'm looking at the various things that have hit him in the last month, maybe, or the last several months. Obviously, you have the pandemic, you have the job losses, you have the story about the taxes, you had the big story a couple of weeks ago about his looking down on soldiers as losers and suckers, which I think hurt him a lot. This story seems to imply that people who pay taxes are losers and suckers. And then there's this other story, and again, who knows how much of this breaks through, if any of it at all, the story that's in the Atlantic this morning by McKay Coppins, who has awfully good sources, that Trump secretly mocks his Christian supporters. Let me just read you one paragraph. In private, many of Trump's comments about religion are marked by cynicism and contempt, according to people who have worked for him. Former aides told me, McKay Coppins, that they've heard Trump ridicule conservative religious leaders, dismiss various faith groups with cartoonish stereotypes, and deride certain rights and doctrines held sacred by many of the Americans who constitute his base. I guess I sometimes wonder, Jonathan, whether there's kind of a cumulative weight where people just, it's not one thing, it's not one story, it's just this is this guy. This is a guy who is not like us. This is a guy who looks down on people like me. And again, you only need 2, 3, 4% to make a tremendous difference in this race. So I wonder whether or not this drip, drip, drip has a cumulative effect on him at the moment when he needs to stage a comeback.
I mean, I think this was the problem Hillary Clinton faced in 2016, right? I mean, there was just so much weighing down on her. She was so much on defense for so long in that election. And I think Trump now faces the same thing. He's got a tremendous weight of baggage and, then, sort of self imposed baggage. I mean, his big promise from the last election was that he was going to build a wall that Mexico was going to pay for.
Oh, yeah.
That was the number one
Oh, yeah.
promise of the Trump administration. And I just look at that and I'm like, from the Democrats' point of view, they're not going to mock him for for the fact that there's not a wall that they didn't want. They will mock him for incompetence on the one thing that he promised. And that has the sort of effect of people like looking around and going, wait, that's kind of right. Like he didn't do the one thing he said he was going to do first and foremost. So I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's one thing. I think it's the weight of a lot of things. As far as the McKay Coppins reporting, seems to me like that's the kind of thing that you would see as a highlighted piece in the vice presidential debate, where there might be an attempt to make Mike Pence answer for Donald Trump's treatment of religion. Whether it's stormtrooping over protesters in Washington to stand in front of a church with the Bible raised, and Trump not really having any clue about what's in the book that he's holding, to these questions of what does he say about evangelicals in private, to the sort of obvious efforts to manipulate segments of the population with things that he doesn't actually seem to believe.
And it's all plausible. I think that's part of it is that when you hear these stories, it seems consistent with the doubts that you've had. Okay, so speaking of other things that are developing, and I feel guilty after every one of these podcasts for not spending more time on the coronavirus. And 200,000 is not just a statistic. I mean, it is a national ongoing tragedy. And I'm here in Wisconsin, and we're having a significant outbreak. We have not really been affected that much by the coronavirus to the extent of, say, other states. But states now reporting nearly 22% positive tests. And this outbreak is very intense in northeast Wisconsin, in the Green Bay area. And interestingly enough, Donald Trump plans to hold rallies Saturday at airports in Green Bay, one in Green Bay and one in La Crosse. And that's an area experiencing the second highest rate of infection in the country. The La Crosse is. The Green Bay area has the sixth highest rate. So the timing doesn't seem good. And it does seem that there is this confluence of events that's making it harder for him to come back. So tell me, you're working on the book, you do your regular reporting. What is the mood? What are you picking up from the people that you know on both sides? Are Democrats feeling more hopeful? Are they still suffering from PTSD? Do Republicans see what's coming down the track? What do they say when they're not on the record?
Democrats are, I think, like a couple weeks ago, they were in the place where they were in 2016 to some extent, and I think this is true now too, where they feel like they're in a good place to win the election. They are more than cautiously optimistic. They are optimistic. And I don't think they assume that Trump is going to lose, but they feel like they're in as good a place as they can be. At the same time, there is that sort of PTSD. The second they start thinking they might win, they immediately start thinking, how are we going to blow this? On the Republican side, I think it's also similar to what you saw in 2016, which is that like Trump needs to win. Trump needs to pull an inside straight or shoot the moon or whatever cards metaphor you want. But that possibility still exists, and that it has not been foreclosed. And you can put together an electoral map where Donald Trump wins more than 270 electoral votes. Um, you know, Basically on states that he won last time with a couple of subtractions. I think Wisconsin is fascinating, Charlie, and particularly you mentioned Green Bay. You know this better than I do, but Brown County, Wisconsin, around Green Bay, is one of those counties that was strong for Obama in 2008, weak for Obama, but for Obama in 2012, and then moved significantly into the Trump camp in 2016. And I'm curious to I'm going to watch Brown County, Wisconsin closely on election night because you've got that coronavirus outbreak, and also the other thing in Wisconsin. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but um, you know, not so far away from, certainly in the same media markets to some extent as Kenosha down to the south. I think it's one thing for the president to warn about rioting and civil unrest, and what would happen if the Democrats were in control and Antifa and all those things in places where it's not actually happening. But my sense is that whoever you are, uh, almost exclusively people do want civility. They do want safety and security, and that in Wisconsin you've actually seen the effects of the president adding fuel, or at least seen him adding fuel to a fire that is on your doorstep, and that may have a negative effect for him, even though there are probably places where it helps him with his base.
No, I think that's true, and I think that there's been a lot of focus on how strong the base for him is. In Wisconsin, the Republican base is quite adamantly for Trump, but in a state like this, that base is not large enough. And you're looking at some of these polls, which look, I'm raising my eyebrows at polls showing Biden up by 10. I think it would be more like 5 or 6. But yeah, that has not worked here for him. And could I just throw out a little journalistic thing here?
Sure.
It's it's kind of hilarious how every national reporter has decided to come to Cedarburg, Wisconsin, which is next door to where I live. It's my backyard, basically. And it's just a fantastic little town. It's one of the great American towns. But it's like everybody from Time Magazine to, I mean, it's in the card.
Charlotte Alter from Time just camped out there.
Well, no, and she did a great job, and Tim Alberta, these are great reporters. All of these reports have been fantastic. But Cedarburg is Cedarburg, and it's kind of Trumpy. It's very Catholic. And I would just suggest, if you're coming back here, go just a little bit south, because all suburbs are not the same. And you look at, and I wrote about this in my newsletter last week. If you look at these suburbs in Milwaukee County, some of those suburbs where I grew up, these are suburbs that used to be 70% Republican that are going to be 70% Democratic this year.
Right. You should go to the places where the median household income is closer to 50,000 than 100,000, and you should go to places where there is a white suburb, a largely white suburb next to a largely black suburb, and you should talk to the voters there who were Trump voters last time, because I think that's where you're going to see movement.
Yeah, and I think you are seeing movement, and I think some of those suburbs are going to be really are going to move very heavily against Trump. There's also, again, even in the WOW counties, I think there's going to be some softness. So, but before I let you go here, the big news of the day, at least in terms of polls, where we have 2 polls out of Pennsylvania, and as much as I think the election will be decided by Wisconsin, because, well, I live in Wisconsin, it's really, really hard to see Donald Trump winning the presidency without winning Pennsylvania. So we first got the New York Times Siena poll showing Biden with a 9-point lead, and then at midnight we got the ABC Washington Post poll also showing a 9-point lead. That's a big deal. in Pennsylvania, and the numbers are just staggering when you look at what's happening with women. It's old story to have a gender gap, but this is really quite amazing. I mean, he's just getting blown out in the suburbs and among women. Trump is at this point, and I can't see Trump winning without winning Pennsylvania. I mean, you can do a map, but just realistically, I just don't see that happening.
I think if he loses Pennsylvania, the election's over for him. Because I think if he loses Pennsylvania, you're going to see other places like Pennsylvania moving into the Biden camp. Like, I think if he loses Pennsylvania, he also loses Wisconsin, and Michigan. I think Michigan's gone for Trump. And we see polls that show Ohio competitive. That shouldn't have been a problem for Trump, but he went and promised manufacturing jobs, and then we saw factories closing down in Ohio. So the reality of the Trump presidency for so many people in that in those lower and middle income brackets has been so different than what he says from a stage, and there's proof points now. There weren't proof points in 2016. He hadn't been president. This is difficult for him. I do believe that there is some hidden Trump vote in polling. That is to say, I think that there are a lot of Trump people who simply won't reply to pollsters. I think it's harder to get a feel for that. But I also think that a lot of those undecideds break in the last week or so, and they tend to break in one direction. 7 to 3 or 8 to 2 out of every 10. And he's at a point where he really needs something to shake up this race to make sure that they don't break against him, because I think there's a significant part of the electorate that's usually just kind of like, screw it, let's grab somebody new, unless they're feeling really secure about where they are. And I don't know anybody who feels really secure right now.
Yeah. Jonathan Allen from NBC, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast. We always appreciate it. Cannot wait to see your book next year.
Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. By the way, if you are a member of our new Bulwark Plus, you will be able to join us for a special post-debate live Zoom chat with the whole Bulwark team. So just check that out. You can get the links from the newsletters. If you're not yet a member of Bulwark Plus, you have time to sign up for that. And of course, we will have a special post-debate podcast tomorrow when we will be back and do this all over again. Okay, so don't